What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NBA Saturday, February 13th. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's NBA slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, let's take a look at the point guard position. I like Malcolm Brogdon from the Indiana Pacers playing the Atlanta Hawks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, but they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Malcolm Brogdon has averaged 38.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 26% usage rate. He scored 36, 31, and 32 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 36, 34, and 36 minutes. He's projected at 37.1 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.2 times value. He's 7,200 FanDuel salary and 300 more on DraftKings. Vegas thinks there's going to be 226.5 points scored in this game, and Malcolm Brogdon has scored 44 and 35 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Atlanta Hawks. I think he's in a good spot to get 40 fantasy points or more and hit or exceed his value, well, get over his value. So I like Malcolm Brogdon here versus the Atlanta Hawks. Okay, another point guard that I like is Derrick Rose from the New York Knicks playing the Houston Rockets, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing point guards. Derrick Rose has averaged 25.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 22 minutes per game with a 30% usage rate. He scored 37 and 24 fantasy points in his last 2 games, playing 19 and 20 minutes. He's projected at 24.3 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.7 times value. He's 5,200 FanDuel salary, and he's 400 less on DraftKings. So I like that DraftKings price. Now, Derrick Rose has scored 19, 41, 20, and 10 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Houston Rockets. Vegas thinks there's going to be 209.5 points scored in this game. So it has a low implied game total, and it is a back-to-back. But I love this DraftKings price. I think he can score 25 fantasy points or more and hit 5 times value or more. So I like Derrick Rose here versus the Houston Rockets. Okay, let's take a look at the shooting guard position. So if he's available to play tonight, I like Tyler Hero from the Miami Heat playing the Utah Jazz, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing shooting guards. But Tyler Hero has averaged 29.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 34 minutes per game with a 24% usage rate. He scored 28 and 27 fantasy points in his last 2 games, playing 35 and 32 minutes. He's projected at 29.1 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5 times value. He's 5,800 FanDuel salary and 200 more on DraftKings. Vegas thinks there's going to be 217.5 points scored in this game. So if he plays tonight, I like Tyler Hero here versus the Utah Jazz. Okay, now here's a value play for you. High risk, high reward play here. But I like Cam Reddish from the Atlanta Hawks playing the Indiana Pacers, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Cam Reddish has averaged 20.4 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 28 minutes per game with a 19% usage rate. He scored 11, 19, and 17 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 21, 26, and 30 minutes. He's projected at 19.6 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.7 times value. He's 4,200 FanDuel salary and 100 less on DraftKings. Vegas thinks there's going to be 226.5 points scored in this game. It's a fast-paced game and a good matchup, so I like Cam Reddish as a value play, high risk, high reward play here versus the Indiana Pacers. Okay, let's take a look at the small forward position. I like Jimmy Butler from the Miami Heat playing the Utah Jazz, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing small forwards, but Jimmy Butler has averaged 43.4 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 32 minutes per game with a 27% usage rate. He scored 51, 55, and 42 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 39, 36, and 34 minutes. He's projected at 45.1 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5 times value. He's 9,000 FanDuel salary, and he's 700 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. So I like Jimmy Butler here versus the Utah Jazz. Okay, now here's a stud for you at the small forward position. I like Kevin Durant. If he plays tonight, looks like he's going to be able to play. He's expected to be available versus the Warriors, from the Brooklyn Nets versus the Warriors, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Kevin Durant has averaged 49.3 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 31% usage rate. He's projected at 49 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.9 times value. He's 10,000 FanDuel salary and 400 less on DraftKings. So good matchup here. So I like Kevin Durant here versus the Golden State Warriors.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on.
Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day,
we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
And just real quick, I'm going to add this player to my watch list. He just kind of caught my eye here. I like Kelly Oubre Jr. from the Golden State Warriors playing the Brooklyn Nets, who have the 4th worst defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing small forwards, Kelly Oubre Jr. has averaged 26.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 29 minutes per game with a 22% usage rate. But he scored 34, 28, and 34 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 33, 34, and 35 minutes. He's projected at 29.6 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's only 4.5 times value. He's 6,600 FanDuel salary, but he's 300 less on DraftKings. So I like that DraftKings price. Now Kelly Oubre Jr. has scored 23, 27, and 25 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Brooklyn Nets, but he seems to be on somewhat of a hot streak here. He's playing a bunch of minutes. Just got a feeling about him. It's a fast-paced game. I think it suits his play style. So I like Kelly Oubre Jr., especially on DraftKings here versus the Brooklyn Nets. Okay, let's take a look at the power forward position. I like Bam Adebayo from the Miami Heat playing the Utah Jazz, who have a good defense overall, and they give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. Bam Adebayo has averaged 41.4 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 25% usage rate. He scored 36, 38, and 50 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 33, 35, and 38 minutes. He's projected at 41.7 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.8 times value. He's 8,700 FanDuel salary and 500 less on DraftKings. So I like that DraftKings price. He scored 47 and 58 fantasy points in the last 2 games versus the Utah Jazz. So I like Bam Adebayo here versus the Utah Jazz. Okay, now a nice mid-range play for you and a value play on DraftKings. I like Jae'Sean Tate from the Houston Rockets playing the New York Knicks, who have a good defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing power forwards. Jae'Sean Tate has averaged 20.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 27 minutes per game with a 14% usage rate. But take a look at his last 3 games. He scored 30, 23, and 24 fantasy points, playing 34, 28, and 29 minutes. So his minutes have been ramped up. He had great production last game. Now he's only projected at 22.1 fantasy points here tonight. And on FanDuel, that's only 4 times value because he's 5,600 FanDuel salary, but he's 900 less on DraftKings. So this would be a DraftKings only play for me. So I like Jae'Sean Tate here versus the New York Knicks. Okay, moving on to the center position. I like Rudy Gobert from the Utah Jazz playing the Miami Heat, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and although they've been pretty good versus opposing centers, Rudy Gobert has averaged 39.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with an 18% usage rate. He scored 51, 42, and 43 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 34, 36, and 30 minutes. He's projected at 40.4 fantasy points here tonight. Now on FanDuel, that's only 4.7 times value because he's 8,600 FanDuel salary, but he's 1,500 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. Probably my favorite DraftKings play on the slate, Rudy Gobert has scored 46, 56, 38, and 50 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Miami Heat. That DraftKings price is just way too low, so I like Rudy Gobert here versus the Miami Heat. Okay, another center that I like is DeMarcus Cousins from the Houston Rockets playing the New York Knicks, who have a good defense overall, and they give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing centers. DeMarcus Cousins has averaged 25 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 19 minutes per game with a 24% usage rate. He scored 36, 20, and 29 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 24, 22, and 24 minutes. He's projected at 27.7 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.5 times value, but Christian Wood is still out, so DeMarcus Cousins is going to get plenty of minutes. He's a point per minute monster. He's got 40 plus fantasy point upside, and he's 6,200 FanDuel salary and 300 more on DraftKings. Oh, and he scored 67 fantasy points in his last game versus the New York Knicks, so I love that. So I like DeMarcus Cousins here versus the New York Knicks.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.